Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's program. My name is Leah Desher. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Education and Outreach Specialist for DHPSNY. Before we really start diving into things, I have just a couple of quick housekeeping notes to mention. If you have any sound or sort of technical issues today, I just ask that you let me know in the chat box with a direct message, and I'll do my best to help you out. And just wanted to let you all know that the teach-in portion of this program is being recorded, but our conversation afterwards will not be recording. And so the recording for that will be available on our YouTube and also sent out to you all by email within probably the next week or so, alongside a couple of resources that we have. So I just want to kick things off by sharing a little bit about the Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services for New York program. DHPSNY, as we like to call it, is a collaboration between the New York State Archives, the New York State Library, with services provided by the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. DHPSNY is a statewide program that provides free planning and education services to support the vast network of collecting institutions such as archives, libraries, historical societies, museums, and other organizations that safeguard and ensure access to New York's historical records and library research materials. DHPSNY services include archival needs assessments, preservation and condition surveys, strategic planning assistance, and access to a variety of educational programs, such as this. You can check out our website at dhpsny.org to learn more about us. And so now to sort of situate this within the larger context of the work being done at the state level, the State Education Department is overseen by the New York State of Regents. And in April of 2021, the Board of Regents offered their framework on diversity, equity, and inclusion in New York schools and subsequently issued their culturally responsive sustaining education framework. So this series of webinars, dialogues, hybrids that we have is DHPSNY doing an effort on behalf of the State Archives and State Library to extend the work of the Board of Regents into the cultural heritage community and address these issues in the context of collecting organizations across the state. Because DHPSNY is positioned as a resource and a connector for cultural heritage organizations throughout New York, we recognize that it's important for our efforts to be more actively engaged in doing and fostering anti-racism work within this field. So for this reason, we've been working with ARIA Strategies to get a sense of what type of work our constituents are already doing and where folks like you around the state are interested in further developing their learning. ARIA Strategies is a firm that provides mission-driven solutions for nonprofits based in Rochester, New York, that DHPSNY has been working with for a few years now to produce anti-racism content for collecting institutions. And we are really grateful to have ARIA facilitating this program today. So I'm going to pass things over to her to set the space for us. Thanks all.
Thanks, Aaliyah, and thanks, DHPSNY and New York State Library and Archive. It's always great to be in this space with all of you. I'm really excited to continue our conversation on anti-racism in the cultural heritage sector. Today's program is, like Leah mentioned, a hybrid where we record the first portion of our program and then we turn off the recording and we have some conversation with each other to teach and learn together. As a reminder, I'm Aria Camioni Lind. I have the great privilege of leading ARIA Strategies based in Rochester, New York, but working across the state with all different kinds of not-for-profits, including cultural heritage organizations. This year, our theme is building an inclusive 250th. We are ready. We are getting ready for the 250th. And our guiding question this year is, how do we make our collecting organizations interdisciplinary and representative of the realities of our many New York histories? How do we tell those undertold stories? And how do we build the relationships that we need to build in order to get the information we need to tell those stories? I'm just going to kick us off with some agreements and norms for our work together. We created these together in January of 2022. We continue to use these because they're a good fit for this group. If you need to add or change anything, just let me know. You can put it in the chat and we can add and shift these around as it makes sense for us. Our first norm is lead with love. This is a journey. Drop the mic, step up, step back, speak for yourself, embody the values of inclusion, respect, and mutual positive regard. Use direct communication. Come to this space teachable. Open your mind, really listen. Stay engaged even when it's difficult to stay engaged. Speak your own truth. Be prepared and willing to experience discomfort. Expect and accept non-closure. Ask questions in the chat or directly to us in a message, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. Be responsible for what you hear. Use I statements. Assume best intent. And most importantly, love each other into education. So today I am very excited to co-facilitate this dialogue with a friend and colleague of mine. We are going to ask you today to expand your understanding of intersectionality and identify practical suggestions for reaching a broader audience through your collection and your organization. We're going to start off with some introductions with our co-facilitator. We'll do a quick, what we're calling teach-in this year. It's like a little mini webinar. We'll have a dialogue between me and our co-facilitator, and then we'll jump into some small group conversations, plenty of time for questions, and then we'll talk about next steps and action items. Just so everybody knows, we created an anonymous question catcher for this program. We invite you to add your questions to it for discussion later in the session. We do this as a way to try to make a more equitable opportunity. And if something is uncomfortable or you're concerned about staying anonymous because it might be sensitive, this is a good document for you to use. So Leah will put the link to the anonymous question catcher in our chat. And if you have a question that you want to ask, but you don't want to actually voice it, you can feel free to put it into the chat. And with that, today you can expect large and small group conversations where we build community, share information, discuss and debrief, and we make some plans for the future. We'll hear from practitioners in the field. I didn't update this slide. We'll hear from practitioners in the field about intersectionality, how that shows up in our own practice, how it shows up in our organizations, and how we can improve our practices and organizations as cultural heritage community members through an intersectional lens. I'm going to ask you to ask questions and get comfortable with discomfort. You can expect to feel uncomfortable, curious, frustrated, heard, confused, and surprised. And when you get these slides, they will be updated. And with that, I'm going to ask my friend and colleague, Tam, to go ahead and introduce herself.
Hi, good morning. Are we still morning? No, good afternoon, everybody. This day has been like one long rolling day at this point, or this week has. My name is Tamara Lee. I am originally from Rochester, New York. That's where I spent most of my adult professional career. Recently relocated to the South in the last 4 or 5 years, but a lot of my work is still in New York State. I would say that my focus is intersectionality. That is really the heart of all the work that I do. But that comes in many different forms at this point in my career. I'm the editor of a magazine called Blackout Magazine. You can see some of my covers behind me. I always try to lean this way because that's a big picture of my head to be. So you don't have to stare at me twice during this whole ordeal. But our magazine is a voice, a vehicle, a platform for Black and Brown, BIPOC, queer communities to be able to have a place to just share thoughts, a safe space to really find some equity in journalism. And the other piece of my work is in my consulting practice. And so really same focus, honestly, is that intersectionality quotient. We do DEI training, but from the perspective of both the BIPOC community and the queer community and what that intersectionality looks like. Being able to see people as not a monolith, but a collection of all different identity factors that build into who they are. And when many of those pieces of identity are marginalized communities, what that looks like in terms of equity, meeting the world meeting you, and experience. So I've had the opportunity and the honor to work on all kinds of different projects doing that work. The last 2 years, I've worked a lot with capacity building with organizations in terms of community engagement. I have a background in public relations, so that always sort of feeds in there as well. Um, I've gotten the opportunity in the last year or so to work on building curriculum at the collegiate level as well as the high school level. I consult on a lot of projects for municipalities, just making sure that there's a focus on intersectionality and equity in all the work that we do, whether it's art or violence or building and construction and infrastructure in cities and organizations. So I get the opportunity to speak to folks all around the country and talk about some of the things that we're going to talk about today.
Thanks, Tam. Um, as we transition into this sort of teach-in portion, I'm going to share Tam's slides. So Tam, to get us started, I'm going to pull up these slides and I'll just ask, can you kind of start from the beginning and can you just give us like, what's the common vocabulary we need? Like, what is intersectionality? What does that mean? And do we need to know anything else?
Um, I think intersectionality is it's one of those like buzzwords sort of things that floats, like trigger and gaslighting and the things that sort of float around public consciousness. And some people, because of that, attached to the term, maybe without fully understanding what it is, or completely detached from it because they don't understand exactly what it is. Because in reality, we all live in an intersectional world. Like everyone is on the intersections of something. You're a mother and you're a daughter and you are a professional, and like if you have managed to live this life and only be one thing, like bless your heart, and I am super envious. But most of us juggle all different pieces of culture and understanding and existence. And so in my work specifically, and often the way the word is used is talking about sort of the overlapping of identity and culture. And so everyone should be able to connect to the term and the fact that we all are intersectional beings. Like we all are pieces of many things, a composite of all kinds of things meshed together. I don't think it's always as easy to connect that to that word for some people, but like I said, like we all have some level of intersectionality. When we're talking about culture and we're talking about marginalized communities, it becomes a little bit of a different conversation. And I think that that's where some people often have a lack of understanding of what that looks like. So, for example, um, if I am a Black person in this country, I have a certain kind of experience that is very unique to me. There is camaraderie in sort of the general cultural Black experience to some degree, some commonalities, some factors that connect us together, even though my experience as a Black woman may be completely different than someone else's. Um, but there are, levels of oppression, culture, racism that is something that you just face as being part of the culture. So that's like one bucket. And then what else is there? Okay, so say that I am queer or part of the LGBTQ community. So now that's a whole entire same list. Very could be have completely different experiences depending on who I am, the family background I have, where I live in the world. My relationships, but there are some common threads between the experience that I identify, and also levels of oppression and inequity and transphobia and homophobia and things that I would experience as being part of that culture. So now pile on another one. Say instead of just being queer, I am also trans. Now there are things that are threads that tie me through the trans community, things that we all equally experience and understand, and also experiences that are vastly different. So now I am Black dealing with racism in a universal way. I am queer, so I'm dealing with racism within the queer community. being part of the queer community, I'm also dealing with homophobia from the universal community. Being trans, now I'm dealing with racism from the universal community, racism within the LGBTQ community, and transphobia in the queer community, and transphobia in the universal community. So, you could also apply that to gender. You could, if you identify as a woman and what being a woman in America looks like with all those other factors, you can apply it to if you're an immigrant and what that looks like if you add that evolution into all those other factors. So the idea of intersectionality really asks you to look at not only a person's singular experience, but what it looks like when you combine and compound multiple experiences and multiple feelings of belonging and unbelonging in different communities, different identities, different classifications, and what it looks like as you're experiencing the world, managing all of those different, both similar and opposing levels of oppression within all of those things at the same time. So when someone is asking you to look at intersectionality, it's not just looking at who that person is or how they personally identify, but how the world sees them and what reactions and experiences they then have because of how the world sees them or how they see themselves.
Thank you. That's awesome. So in order to, I know we're going to talk about your self-reflection tool that you created and that you're sharing with us. But first, can you just talk a little bit about why it's important for museums, libraries, archives, historical societies, historic sites, what we call the cultural heritage community or collecting organizations? Can you just talk a little bit about why we all need to be using this lens in what we do, like our organizations, our programming, our exhibits? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's interesting. Like talking to this community of people, I feel like is a little bit different conversation than talking to any other community of people. Because first of all, I feel like there's a shared appreciation and value. I don't think you get into this work if you don't have an appreciation for stories, stories of people, what happened, who they are. Um, their experience, like life through their eyes. I think that that has to sort of be a common thread when you get into this work. I can only imagine that that has to be sort of a shared passion. And so to do that work, to believe and care about those things, you have to recognize intersectionality because that's all about who these different groups of people are. And if we don't incorporate those things, then we aren't really telling those stories. We aren't really sharing who these people were. And I think that it's extra important to keep an emphasis on it and keep focus on it because it's really easy, I think, to be able to look at people in sort of a clinical way. Um, like I'll never forget, we used to go to the same museum every year with school and go on a tour. And sadly, often there was the same exhibit every year, but nevertheless, like we would learn about different civilizations and cultures of people that no longer existed and be able to see like the little dioramas of them or whatever. And so I think it becomes really easy when you're in this field to sort of look at folks from that very separated perspective of like examination. Um, and that doesn't tell you the whole story. And so I think it's incredibly important to do people and culture and history justice to be able to not just sort of look at people from like through a lens of like a scientific lens almost like a observational lens, but be able to really understand their lives and their experiences and be able to tell that part of the story in order to do not only those specific people justice, but historically, like the things that we create, the things that we preserve, the stories that we tell are the ones that people are going to be looking at 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 200 years from now. And so if we miss those pieces, all that's left is what we preserved. And so if we can't appreciate the fullness of people and experiences if we miss pieces of culture because we just didn't know how to get it or we didn't prioritize it being important. For all intents and purposes, those people didn't exist. Like, we are doing the work in these kind of fields that will tell the story of who lived and what happened and who was involved for generations and generations to come. And so the things that we're collecting, if they're incomplete, if we're not looking at intersectionality, if we're not able to tell that full and complete story, we're doing people a disservice for generations because you can't go back and get it again. Like, what was it? Just like you're searching for things to find, they will be too. And so being able to make sure that we're really capturing the fullness of people and life and experience, I think it's incredibly important to make sure that intersectionality is a part of that conversation, to make sure we're doing our best to capture as many pieces of it as we possibly can.
Awesome, thanks. So now I'm going to ask you to introduce us to this self-reflection tool and also talk about like what it tells us, why it's important to use tools like this to improve our practice and as individuals and as organizations. And so I just need you to tell me when to move the slides, okay?
You got it.
All right.
You got it. So, like I said, in the work that I've done in the last couple of years, there's actually been a really big emphasis on the idea of community engagement. And I actually have many organizations that bring me in, obviously for different purposes, but like with the same sort of conversation about like, well, there's these groups of people that we just can't reach. For me specifically, they often bring me in when it's BIPOC groups or when it's Black and brown queer communities, queer and trans communities that they just can't seem to be able to like break into, either to provide services, to ask questions, to engage in the work that they do. And they just truly don't understand why. They just don't get it. We've tried a million things and nothing's working, to almost to the point of frustration. Like, we're trying to do this right. We're trying to engage these communities. We're trying to tell these stories. We're trying to serve these people, but they're just not interested. And there's like a level of frustration there that like there's not an appreciation maybe for this effort that they're making as an organization to reach out and reach into these communities. So in the context of this conversation and the original question Arya asked in terms of like, why is it important? I think that once we sort of get through the historical drudge and political things and whatever to the point that we decide, yes, indeed, at this point in history, we decided that it is important to tell these stories and remember these things and capture snapshots of what life really was like and include all the pieces and players involved. We now get it. We decided it's important. And so we need these people to play ball, really. I mean, like they need to participate with us. They need to understand that, they have to come talk to us. They have to tell us their stories. They have to share their traditions with us so that we can get it and understand. And when those things are not well received, or even they're just not particularly successful, there's a level of frustration the organizations in my, experience of working with them get to where they're like, well, we just don't get it. And so they're willing to pay me, all this money to come in and tell them like where people are. And the first experience I had with this was there was a hospital system in my hometown that is literally smack in the middle of a historically Black residential neighborhood. And they hired me because they run a cancer center, and there are statistically higher incidences of cancer found in Black and brown communities, and they could not get Black and brown folks to engage with them. And they couldn't understand why. And they hired me to find them, these Black and brown folks, and get them to come engage with them and explain to them why what they were doing wasn't working. And it's actually the neighborhood I grew up in. And so it was jarring to me as I was sitting and listening and engaging with them to hear them ask this question, because you could literally, I mean, you were literally dead smack in the middle of a neighborhood full of Black and brown folks, and you can't find them. Like, that was incredible to me. And so that was sort of the beginning of this thought process for me, and I was starting to do this work, but the same sort of theme and questions and process was coming to me over and over again when I got brought in to do engagement work, because I do have a lot of connections to those communities because I'm a part of them. And so the work, sort of the onus of that, was kind of placed on me as this contractor, as this consultant, to give them the answer, or not even give them the answer, but bring them in. Like, you know who they are, so like bring them to us. And I realized that my work had to start at like taking back a few steps to help them understand why what they were doing wasn't working. Because yes, I can give you a list of emails. I can invite folks to come in and have meetings with me and introduce them to you. But even at that point, getting them to engage with you in any real way is not guaranteed. And there's reasons for that. And there's also reasons that the things that you are trying aren't working. And so my time with you is better served by helping you understand what those reasons are. And out of that work, and having worked with many organizations that we continue to have these conversations with, I developed this tool that I now use with almost every situation that I'm in, because I just feel like it is a great way for folks to be able to sort of look through different eyes before they start this work in any capacity, any type of DEI work, any type of community engagement work. I think it's incredibly important for them to go through this process. And I kind of, and in conversations with Aria about today and trying to figure out like what the best sort of use of this material would be, I questioned whether I should invite you all to sort of come on this journey with me and participate in the reflection tool. But also, because of the people that were going to be in the room, it felt incredibly valuable, and probably more so, for me to explain this tool to you and how it works, so that hopefully you have the opportunity to bring it or something similar to the people that you work with, and maybe be able to, again, sort of be able to look at this process with new eyes, and maybe refresh some of the work that you're doing, and have ability to do it in a little bit different ways. So the tool. This is the tool that I'm super proud of, because it actually amazes me every single time that I go through the process. And so this tool ideally helps people identify where their implicit bias lives. We all have implicit bias. Like, words like that, people don't like them. They're uncomfortable. Implicit bias, white privilege, things like that, white supremacy, and the idea of it being infused in American culture, and thus all of us, because that's how we were socialized. Like, that's not a comfortable conversation for people to have. And like the theme of like my work this week, for some reason, has been like nice people. Like, nice, good people struggle profoundly with identifying or positioning themselves adjacent to like white supremacy and implicit bias and privilege. Like, nice people, like those things are bad. They're horrible. And we're nice people. And so we don't want those things. We want equity, and we want justice, and we want fairness. So like, of course I don't have bias. And of course I don't, like wear I recognize my privilege, and I wear it like a, I don't wear it like a badge of honor. Like I work to not, let that lead my work, right? Because we're nice, and nice people don't do those horrible things. But the fact of the matter is, it has nothing to do with how kind or how nice or how wonderful or even how well-intentioned folks are. It's simply the fact that because of the world we were socialized in, those things affect all of us. Black folks, white folks, blue, green, purple, yellow, everybody. Everyone is a product of the environments that we were raised in and the culture that we're a part of. And so we carry those things, and just often find it really hard to recognize them. So the beauty of this self-reflection tool is a lot of people, when you ask them questions out loud, they want to give the right answer, right? They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to offend anyone. They don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And that is honestly prohibitive to progress. Like you have to find out where people really are in order to get to the heart and the root of things. So the thing I love most about this reflection tool is it is 100% you and a piece of paper, and the answers are for you. And I make it clear, and I encourage you to make it clear if you ever use this, that you will not be asked to give any of these answers out loud. Like we will absolutely not ask you what you said. This is for you and your eyes only and your observation. So now you can click into the first slide. Maybe. So this is basically what I just said. So it's just about asking people to be honest with themselves to, and also the nice thing about this is I found that it really works just as well no matter who you are and what position you serve, in your organization. You could be a direct care person, you could be a researcher, you could be a CEO, you could be a board member, you could be, you could, do repairs in the building. It's all the same for no matter who uses it. So this is just inviting you to be able to, be open and honest with yourself and sort of jump on the journey so you can click through. So this first set of slides is going to ask people the factors that you feel like affect BIPOC folks. Like what things do you think affect people, whatever the audience is of people that you're having trouble reaching. So for this conversation, we'll say BIPOC, like we'll use that title. So list for me 3 things that you feel like affects your ability to connect with these audiences as an organization. And again, there's no right answer here. The things in the to things to think about part are the things that I say out loud to the folks that while they're writing, to just kind of keep prompting them to continue writing. It shouldn't take a bunch of deep thought. It should be the things that pop in the top of your head. Like, what are the reasons why we're having trouble reaching this audience? What are they? Okay, next one. Next one is those 3 things that you listed. List one thing that you are personally doing to combat whatever that list of 3 things are. So say I said, one of the things is that people say I work in a medical facility and, there are cultural aversion to medicine and like the medical community from the BIPOC community. So that's one of the reasons. So it's really easy to talk about like, well, the agency has this and the agency does this. And it's also really easy on the other end of that spectrum to believe that, well, like I'm just a secretary. So I can't affect change. I can't tell the CEO how to run this building. We're not allowed to do A, B, D, and C. So I can't change anything. That's not our policy. And all of those things remove personal responsibility and accountability for how we make people feel. So like no matter what you do, there's ways that you personally, if you choose to, can affect people's experiences with you and your organization. And so this challenges people to think about, first of all, if they are doing any of those things personally, and if they are, like, what are they? How are you addressing in your own personal work every single day those 3 factors that you named? Okay, next one. So this one, opposite end of the spectrum. Name something for each of those 3 original things that your agency is doing. The reason why this is interesting, no matter where you are at your agency, is if people don't have an answer to this question, it means that your agency or your organization or your department is probably not doing a great job communicating that work. Either they're not doing it, or if there are initiatives that are happening and your folks don't know about them, that's a conversation in itself, because that means, are you empowering your staff to be able to make some of these things different? So if your agency or your organization or your department, your building has thought about these things and implemented things to try to make this different, if nobody knows, like that's a distinct factor as to why they may not be working. Okay, next one. So this is actually sort of the trick question part of it. And that's why you can't learn about this tool and take it. Like it's kind of, you have to kind of pick one or the other. So often I'll have people go through the process and do it and then administer it to others, because if you know this part, then it's harder to give real honest answers. Because the next question is, can you identify what informed your answer to the first question? What gave you those impressions? And this is sometimes a hard one for folks. So I usually give them a little bit longer to answer this question, because this is the part where you find where your implicit bias kicks in. Because really, implicit bias is literally just the things that you carry and picked up along the way, the messaging, the narrative you have in your own mind as to why things are what they are. Did you step into your role and the person who trained you sort of imparted these ideas to you? Like, well, we keep trying to reach out to A, B, C, D, and E community, and it's just not working. Like, we've tried all these things and it just doesn't work. Like, they just aren't interested in engaging with us. When someone says something like that to you, whether you believe it or don't believe it, it sticks with you. It exists within your consciousness forever, and that informs your implicit bias. If it's what they told you in orientation, if it's what you learned in college, if the reason why you ever questioned why the things that you were learning about in school didn't include some of this information, someone may at some point have told you that it wasn't available, it didn't exist, no one collected it, it's not written down. Like, all of those things are things that some came from somewhere besides this community telling you. Or if it is people from your workplace that are part of the community, if it is from friends of yours that are part of the community that have told you that, all of that feeds, or your things your parents told you, whatever, the media, all of that feeds in the way you do your work, the way you look at these communities, and the way you try to engage them. So it's incredibly important, this step, to be able to identify what those things are, because sometimes we don't even think about it. Sometimes we carry beliefs and just don't even know or can identify where they came from. Okay, next one. So this is where we get into the reflection part and why it doesn't matter. And Arya, you don't even really need to click through these steps, because we can just sort of talk about these things. This is where it breaks down, and you'll be able to look, if you ever get into using this tool, to really be able to sort of explain. So I go through the next maybe 4 or 5 slides, and they're really just sort of background information and some of the things that I was just saying out loud to you. But like, a lot of times as organizations, we just guess why it's not working. There is an unfortunate, any type of these sort of like long ago sort of practices, discovered practices, developed practices, we get into this icky place of best practice. So this is the best way to do this, to reach this, to collect this, to make this thing happen, to develop this project. When in fact, best practice isn't always best practice. It's more so what everybody's doing. It's more so common practice than best practice. And we need to be real careful of that, because a lot of organizations that I talk to, they give me all these reasons as to why, and not so much doing the reflection tool, but like in conversation with them when they hire me, as to all the things that they've tried. But the things that they've tried aren't even addressing the actual reasons why the community isn't interested in working with them. And so you're throwing all this stuff against the wall to see what sticks, when in reality, you're putting all these resources and energy and manpower into solving problems that aren't the problem. And that's what happens when you don't have the right people at the table, the right people in the room, and don't have a real understanding of the biases you carry, or how you're reinforcing those biases by the way that you're doing the work that you do. So I could go on, but I have a feeling some of the questions that you're going to ask are going to go into the things that I was going to say. So I will pause, and we can go from there.
Thanks, Tam. I think at this point we can stop the recording, Leah, and then we'll kind of just continue our conversation.